Dawn Diane Huang Di. I am the senior tour manager here at the Wing Luke Museum. This is me, see? And when you look up above you, you'll notice that there are papers hanging from the ceiling. And those are all copies of letters of people who left their homes to come here to Seattle.
Dawn Diane Huang Di, a Vietnamese American, gives us a tour of the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle, Washington, in the heart of Seattle's Chinatown International District. That is celebrated for how it showcases Asian Americans and Pacific Islander immigrants and their experiences living here in the United States. The museum, named after Chinese immigrant Wing Luke, Seattle's first Chinese American and person of color elected to the Seattle City Council in 1962.
Working for civil rights.
Today, more than 5 million Chinese Americans live in the United States. They are the largest group of Asian Americans in the U.S. The museum celebrating their early ancestors here who endured difficult times upon first arriving during the California Gold Rush of 1849, when their labor was used to build the nation's all-important railroad system. However, they were not allowed to become U.S. citizens under U.S. laws such as the Naturalization Act and the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
So basically what it kind of boils down to, unless you are a free white person, a man of good moral character, you could not become a naturalized citizen in the United States. So it's interesting when we think about the creation of the United States of America, who it was that really helped to build this place and the barriers that was put up for them to disenfranchise them and not allow them to partake in what this country is supposed to be all about.
North of Seattle, at the University of Washington, at the Department of American Ethnic Studies, Chinese American scholar Dr. Connie So says the 20,000 Chinese Americans who built the U.S. railroad system, hundreds of them dying, are seldom, if ever, she says, mentioned in the white Anglo narrative of U.S. history taught in schools to this day.
It's definitely the master narrative of the white people. The Industrial Revolution would not have happened had not been for Chinese Americans.
The establishment in the U.S., she says, often getting credit for things the Chinese invented 6,000 years ago.
Let me give you the big one. A lot of people don't know the roots of ketchup. That's a Chinese condiment that a lot of people use. We have been here for a very, very long time.
She says on the more serious subject of white Americans who downplay the harassment and racial attacks against Asian Americans recently in the U.S., need only ask her Asian American students about harassment they've faced on a regular basis in their lives. One of them, Heidi Tendiono, an Indonesian American who says she still suffers from the grade school taunts she faced growing up in Arkansas.
Basically yelling racial slurs at me as I was going home. Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
You know, people didn't realize I was Chinese, you know, especially during, you know, the pandemic. And, you know, so they'd be saying something about the Chinese or, oh, you know, the Chinese, this, that, you know. But then wouldn't notice me, you know, sometimes like sunglasses on, maybe, you know, cowboy boots, stuff like that. They didn't notice.
The neighborhood and schools I went to were primarily white. Up until high school, but I remember like as early as elementary school, people would pull back their eyes, and I first thought this was innocent and like they just hadn't seen an Asian person before, and it was just like, oh, your eyes are different than mine, and there wasn't like a clear your eyes are ugly, so I was like, oh, they're not insulting me. Like I hadn't fully processed that this was an insult, but I knew it made me uncomfortable.
The Wing Luke Museum addresses how Asian Americans are often impacted as people of color by U.S. society's stereotypes of what defines beauty in its exhibit, Where Beauty Lies.
It's an exhibit about the ideas of beauty where they come from and like how people are affected by it within the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities.
For example, beauty in U.S. society for this Asian American woman led her to do too much plastic surgery that would lead to her death.
The pressures and stereotypes around beauty literally killed her. So she did a lot of cosmetic surgery, and the last one that she ended up doing ended up taking her life. Because a lot of the things that people are basing their standards on, if you're growing up in the United States, it's the gaze that is put on the idea that beauty is around being skinny, being light-skinned, basically more European features, right? Like as you go through the space, you're gonna see movie posters and ideas about representation, what that means for folks, what we're seeing in terms of film and in Hollywood.
Dawn Diane says Mulan, Disney's Chinese folklore blockbuster, was one of the first films she'd ever seen with an Asian American woman celebrated in the lead role.
Mulan, in fact, was a big deal for me. That was when I was probably 8 or 9 years old when it came out. And I remember, I might cry, asking my mom to take me to go see it. And it was just so powerful because that was the first time I saw somebody that looked like me from a Disney movie.
She credits 1960s Hollywood actress Tippi Hedren for introducing the nail manicure business to Vietnamese women in Vietnam, who dominate this business today.
It was something that I saw as a kid growing up, and I was never really understood it. Like, how come there are so many folks that I know who are Vietnamese in the nail or the hair salon industry?
The museum also celebrates Bruce Lee, the late Chinese-American martial arts legend who grew up here in Seattle, was a martial arts instructor here, and remains an important symbol in this town of standing up for your rights and heritage as an Asian American. Bruce Lee spent years trying to convince the bosses of the Hollywood establishment that mainstream moviegoers would learn to appreciate his movies.
I think in Seattle, when we heard about how Hollywood wasn't giving him his role, a lot of people in Seattle really followed his career because many people here who are still alive, they were taught by him. And we called it In a Yellow Tone.
Dr. So shows us a unique comic book her students have published about true stories of Chinese Americans in the U.S. during World War II. One of them, Dr. So's grandfather, a U.S. military veteran, challenged to a fight.
And so there are these white guys who are making fun of their English, and my grandfather got really mad, and they got in a fight. So he won, and there was a white commander there who wanted to know what his name is. My grandfather thought he was definitely in trouble, but the guy decided to make him his bodyguard. So my grandfather always told me that if you're going to get in trouble, people are going to dislike you anyways, you might as well do it for what you're going to be going for.
A wall of mirrors at the Wing Luke Museum encourages Asian Americans and all visitors to look at themselves and appreciate who they are.
It invites you to take a deep breath, looking in the mirror, and start at the crown of your head and name the colors in your hair. See where the light plays. Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Of course.
80-year-old Chinese-American Doug Chin of Seattle is widely considered one of the most knowledgeable historians of Chinese Americans in the United States. Among the books he's written, Seattle's International District, The Making of a Pan-Asian American Community, about the contributions of Chinese Americans in Seattle and this country. A history, he says, rarely written about before the 1970s.
It was very important to me because you never read about it in the history books or otherwise, It's like Chinese Americans or Chinese were non-existent insofar as the history of America is concerned. My message is that we played a big role in developing, especially the Western United States. I think Chinese Americans can become a good part of the diversity of what makes America great. And I look at America being great because of its diversity, and that we contribute not only in science and technology, in other areas as well.
Dr. Connie So says the golden rule in life about treating your neighbors as equals needs to apply for all people, no matter their color or ethnic background.
I thought about this a lot, and it has to do with the golden rule. A lot of times in the West, they keep saying that the golden rule of the West and the golden rule of Asia is the same thing. It's not the same thing. Confucius said, do not do to others what you would not have others do to you. In the Bible, it's do to others as you would others do to you. All I think is do to others, that means that you assume that everything you do is right. But what if I don't think it's right? So I always went along with do not do to others, because I don't want people to push their stuff on me, as I won't push it on you. And I think that all of it is true. It just depends on what perspective, what ideology, what morality you have. So I think the big thing is to consider another perspective. So the main thing is we all contribute. Everyone contributes. And when they come to America, most people want to contribute. They want to do something.